All right. Stepford Wives. We are starting at page 35. What a pleasure to see a messy kitchen, Bobbie said. It doesn't quite come up to mine. You don't have the little peanut butter handprints on the cabinets, but it's good. It's very good. Congratulations. I can show you some dull, dingy bathrooms if you'd like, Joanna said. Thanks. I'll just take the coffee. Is instant okay? You mean there's something else? She was short, and I don't think I've ever had a conversation like that. Maybe I have. But, like, in jest. Surely, paradise. Paradise? Paradiddle. She was short and heavy-bottomed in a blue Snoopy sweatshirt and jeans and sandals. Her mouth was big, with unusually white teeth, and she had blue taken-everything eyes and short, dark, tufty hair. Taken everything is hyphenated. And small hands and dirty toes. And a husband named Dave, who was a stock analyst, and 3 sons, 10, 8, and 6. And an old English sheepdog and a corgi. She looked a bit younger than Joanna, 32 or 3. She drank 2 cups of coffee and ate a ring-ding and told Joanna about the women of Fox Hollow Lane. Let's hear it. I'm beginning to think there's a nationwide contest I haven't heard about, she said, tonguing her chocolated fingertips. I do that too. They're not always chocolated. $1 million and Paul Newman for the cleanest house by next Christmas. I mean, it's scrub, scrub, scrub. Wax, wax, wax. It's the same around here, Joanna said. Even at night. And the Men's Association, Bobbie cried. They talked about it, the antiquated sexist unfairness of it. I don't think they want to go, do they? Really? The real injustice in a town with no women's organization, not even a league of women voters. Believe me, I've combed this place, Bobbie said. There's a garden club and a few old biddy church groups for which I'm not eligible anyway. Markow is upward noble for Markowitz. Markow is upward mobile for Markowitz. And there's the very non-sexist Historical Society. Drop in and say hello to them. Corpses in lifelike positions. Dave was in the Men's Association and, like Walter, thought it could be changed from within. But Bobbie knew better. You'll see, we'll have to chain ourselves to the fence before we can get any action. How about that fence? You'd think they were refining opium. They talked about the possibility of having a get-together with some of their neighbors, a rap session to wake them to the more active role they could play in the town's life, but they agreed that the women they had met seemed unlikely to welcome even so small a step toward liberation. They talked about the National Organization for Women, to which they both belonged, and about Joanna's photography. My God, these are great, Bobbie said, looking at the 4 mounted enlargements Joanna had hung in the den. They're terrific. Joanna thanked her. Avid shutterbug. I thought that meant Polaroids of the kids. These are marvelous. Now that Kim's in kindergarten, I'm really going to get to work, Joanna said. She walked Bobbie to her car. Damn it, no, Bobbie said. We ought to try at least. Let's talk to these hausfraus. There must be some of them who resent the situation a little. What do you say? Wouldn't it be great if we could get a group together, maybe even a Now chapter eventually, and give that men's association a good shaking up? Dave and Walter are kidding themselves. It's not going to change unless it's forced to change. Fat cat organizations never do. What do you say, Joanna? Let's ask around. Joanna nodded. We should, she said. They can't all be as content as they seem. Or can they? She spoke to Carol Van Sant. She spoke to Carol Van Sant. Gee, no, Joanna, Carol said. That doesn't sound like the sort of thing that would interest me. Thanks for asking me, though. She was cleaning the plastic divider in Stacy and Allison's room, wiping a span of its accordion folds with firm downstrokes of a large yellow sponge. It would only be for a couple of hours, Joanna said. In the evening, or if it's more convenient for everybody, sometime during school hours. Carol, crouching to wipe the lower part of the span, said, I'm sorry, but I just don't have much time for that sort of thing. Joanna watched her for a moment. Doesn't it bother you, she said, that the central organization here in Stepford, the only organization that does anything significant as far as community projects are concerned, is off limits to women? Doesn't that seem a little archaic to you? Archaic, Carol said, squeezing her sponge in a bucket of sudsy water. Joanna looked at her. Out of date, old-fashioned, she said. Carol squeezed the sponge out above the bucket. No, it doesn't seem archaic to me, she said. She stood up straight and reached the sponge to the top of the next span of folds. Ted's better equipped for that sort of thing than I am, she said, and began wiping the folds with firm downstrokes, each one neatly overlapping the one before. And men need a place where they can relax and have a drink or two, she said. Don't women? No, not so much. Carol shook her neat red-haired shampoo commercial head. Shampoo commercial. Hyphenated. Not turning from her wiping. I'm sorry, Joanna, she said. I just don't have time for a get-together. Okay, Joanna said. If you change your mind, let me know. Would you mind if I don't walk you downstairs? No, of course not. She spoke to Barbara Kamalian on the other side of the Van Sands. Thanks, but I don't see how I could manage it, Barbara said. She was a square-jawed, brown-haired woman in a snug pink dress molding an exceptionally good figure. Lloyd stays in town a lot, she said. And the evenings he doesn't. He likes to go to the men's association. I'd hate to pay a sitter for just... It could be during school hours, Joanna said. No, Barbara said. I think you'd better count me out. She smiled widely and attractively. I'm glad we've met, though, she said. Would you like to come in and sit for a while? I'm ironing. No, thanks, said Joanna. I want to speak to some of the other women. She spoke to Marge McCormick. I honestly don't think I'd be interested in that. And Kit Sunderson, yeah. I'm afraid I haven't the time. I'm really sorry, Mrs. Eberhart. And Donna Claybrook. That's a nice idea, but I'm so busy these days. Thanks for asking me, though. She met Marianne Stavros. She met Marianne Stavros in an aisle in the center market. No, I don't think I'd have time for anything like that. There's so much to do around the house, you know. But you go out sometimes, don't you? Joanna said. Of course I do, Marianne said. I'm out now, aren't I? I mean out for relaxation. Marianne smiled and shook her head, swaying her sheaves of straight blonde hair. No, not often, she said. I don't feel much need for relaxation. See you. And she went away, pushing her grocery cart, and stopped. Took a can from the shelf, looked at it, and fitted it down into her cart and went on. Joanna looked after her and into the cart of another woman going slowly past her. My God, she thought, they even fill their carts neatly. She looked into her own, a jumble of boxes and cans and jars. A guilty impulse to put it in order prodded her. But I'm damned if I will, she thought, and grabbed a box from the shelf, ivory snow, and tossed it in. Didn't even need the damn stuff. She spoke to the mother of one of Kim's classmates in Dr. Very's waiting room, and to Yvonne Weisgalt on the other side of the Stavroses, and to Jill Burke in the next house over. All of them turned her down. They either had too little time or too little interest to meet with other women and talk about their shared experiences. Bobbie had even worse luck, considering that she spoke to almost twice as many women. One taker, she told Joanna, one 85-year-old widow who dragged me through her door and kept me prisoner for a solid hour of close-up saliva spray. Anytime we're ready to storm the men's association, Ida Mae Hamilton is ready and willing. We'd better keep in touch with her, Joanna said. Oh no, we're not done yet. They spent a morning calling on women together on the theory, Bobbie's, that the two of them speaking in planned ambiguity. They spent a morning calling on women together on the theory, Bobbie's, that the two of them speaking in planned ambiguities might create the encouraging suggestion of a phalanx of women with room for one more. It didn't work. Jesus, Bobbie said, ramming her car viciously up Shortridge Hill. Something fishy's going on here. We're in the town that time forgot. Good book by Philip K. Dick, Time Out of Joint. It's a little Stepford wivesy, but more so in like the layout of the town and the town as the reality that all the townspeops live in. Really good. I highly recommend. Time Out of Joint, Philip K. Dick. One afternoon, Joanna left Pete and Kim in the care of 16-year-old Melinda Stavros and took the train into the city, where she met Walter and their friends Shep and Sylvia talk over at an Italian restaurant in the theater district. It was good to see Shep and Sylvia again. They were a bright, homely, energetic couple who had survived several bad blows, including the death by drowning of a 4-year-old son. It was good to be in the city again, too. Joanna relished the color and bustle of the busy restaurant. She and Walter spoke enthusiastically about Stepford's beauty and quiet, and the advantages of living in a house rather than an apartment. She didn't say anything about how home-centered the Stepford women were, or about the absence of outside-the-home activities. It was vanity, she supposed, an unwillingness to make herself the object of commiseration, even Shep and Sylvia's. She told them about Bobbie and how amusing she was, and about Stepford's fine uncrowded schools. Walter didn't bring up the Men's Association, and neither did she. Sylvia, who was with the city's Housing and Development Administration, would have had a fit. But on the way to the theater, Sylvia gave her a sharp, appraising look and said, "A tough adjustment?" "In ways," she said. "You'll make it," Sylvia said, and smiled at her. "How's the photography? It must be great for you up there, coming to everything with a fresh eye." "I haven't done a damn thing," she said. "Bobbie and I have been running around trying to drum up some women's lib activity. It's a bit of a backwater, to tell you the truth." "Running and drumming isn't your work," Sylvia said. "Photography is, or ought to be." "I know," she said. "I've got a plumber coming in any day now to put in the darkroom sink." Walter looks chipper. He is. It's a good life, really. The play, musical hit of the previous season, was disappointing, of course. In the train going home, after they had hashed it over for a few minutes, Walter put on his glasses and got out some paperwork. And Joanna skimmed time and then sat looking out the window and smoking, watching the darkness and the occasional lights riding through it. Sylvia was right. Photography was her work. To hell with the Stepford women, except Bobbie, of course. Both cars were at the station, so they had to ride home separately. Joanna went first in the station wagon, and Walter followed her in the Toyota. The center was empty and stage setty under its 3 street lights. Yes, she would take pictures there before the darkroom was finished, and there were headlights and lighted windows up at the Men's Association house and a car waiting to pull out of its driveway. Melinda Stavros was yawning but smiling, and Pete and Kim were in their beds sound asleep. In the family room, there were empty milk glasses and plates on the lamp table, and crumpled balls of white paper on the sofa and the floor before it, and an empty ginger ale bottle on the floor among the balls of paper. At least they don't pass it on to their daughters, Joanna thought. Or do they? I can't remember I just remember, like, at one point, one of them, I guess it's Bobbie maybe, because I think Joanna is Catherine, if she spells it with 2 A's, Catherine Ross. Either she turns or Bobbie turns, but anyway, it's just like, I don't remember why. Something in the water. Something in the husband's masturbating after the Men's Association. Yeah, what? What? The third time Walter went to the Men's Association, he called at about 9 o'clock and told Joanna he was bringing home the new projects committee to which he had been appointed the time before. Some construction work was being done at the house. She could hear the whine of machinery in the background, and they couldn't find a quiet place where they could sit and talk. "Fine," she said. "I'm getting the rest of the junk out of the dark room so you can have the whole—" "No, listen," he said. "Stay upstairs with us and get into the conversation. A couple of them are die-hard men-onlys. It won't do them any harm to hear a woman make intelligent comments. I'm assuming you will." "Thanks. Won't they object?" "It's our house." "Are you sure they're not looking for a waitress? Or a stripper?" He laughed. "Oh, God, there's no fooling her," he said. "Okay, you got me. But an intelligent waitress, all right? Would ya? It really might do some good." "Okay," she said. "Give me 15 minutes and I'll even be an intelligent, beautiful waitress." How's that for cooperation? Fantastic. Unbelievable. Go, Walter. There were 5 of them, and one, a cheery little red-faced man of about 60 with toothpick ends of waxed mustache, was Ike Mazard, the magazine illustrator. Joanna, shaking his hand warmly, said, "I'm not sure I like you. You blighted my adolescence with those dream girls of yours." And he, chuckling, said, "You must have matched up pretty well." "Would you like to bet on that?" she said. The other 4 were all late 30s or early 40s. The tall, black-haired one, laxly arrogant, was Dale Koba, the president of the association. Dale Koba. Koba. Koba Khan. Distant cousin of Genghis. No, I don't know. He smiled at her with green eyes that disparaged her and said, "Hello, Joanna. It is a pleasure." One of the die-hard men only, she thought. Women are to lay. His hand was smooth without pressure. Ugh. Like warm fish. The others were Anselm, or Axelm, Sunderson, Roddenberry. Wait, the others were Anselm or Axelm, Sunderson, Roddenberry. Oh, okay, I got it. The others were Anselm or Axelm, Sunderson, Roddenberry. Yeah, 4. You probably got it the first time. "I met your wife," she said to Sunderson, who was pale and paunchy, nervous seeming. "If you're the Sundersons across the way, that is." "You did?" "We are, yes. We're the only ones in Stepford. I invited her to a get-together, but she couldn't make it." "She's not very social." Sunderson's eyes looked elsewhere, not at her. "I'm sorry I missed your first name," she said. "Herb," he said, looking elsewhere. Shiesty little... You know what? It doesn't say that. She saw them all into the living room and went into the kitchen for ice and soda and brought them to Walter at the bar cabinet. "Intelligent, beautiful," she said, and he grinned at her. She went back into the kitchen and filled bowls with potato chips and peanuts. There were no objections from the circle of men when, holding her glass, she said, "May I?" and eased into the sofa end Walter had saved for her. Is this what happens to all of them? Ugh! Ike Mazard and Anselm or Axelm, it's like Tweedledum and Tweedledee, rose, and the others made "I'm thinking of rising" movements, except Dale Koba, who sat eating peanuts out of his fist, looking across the cocktail table at her with his disparaging green eyes. They talked about the Christmas Toys project and the Preserve the Landscape project. Roddenberry's name was Frank, and he had a pleasant, pug-nosed, blue-chinned face and a slight stutter. And Koba had a nickname, Diz, which hardly seemed to fit him. They talked about whether this year there shouldn't be Hanukkah lights as well as a creche in the center, now that there were a fair number of Jews in town. They talked about ideas for new projects, which reminds me, any of y'all seen the film Focus with Laura Dern, Meatloaf's in it, and William H. Macy, right? It's all about the new pair of glasses, and then that like pre-World War II anti-Jewish lurking everywhere. Really good movie. Disturbing, but good. Good. It's a good study. A good reminder study. Or a study reminder. It's a study reminder. Anyways. "May I say something?" she said. "Sure," Frank Roddenberry and Herb Sunderson said. "Drink your Coke." Koba was lying back in his chair, looking at the ceiling, disparagingly, no doubt. His hands behind his head, his legs extended. Sound like a pimp or something? "Do you think there might be a chance of setting up some evening lectures for adults," she asked, "or parent and teenager forums in one of the school auditoriums?" "On what subject?" Frank Roddenberry asked. "On any subject there's general interest in," she said. "The drug thing, which we're all concerned about, but which the Chronicle seems to sweep under the rug. What rock music is all about. I don't know, anything that would get people out and listening and talking to each other." "That's interesting," Claude Anselm or Axelm said, leaning forward and crossing his legs, scratching at his temple. He was thin and blonde, bright-eyed, restless. "And maybe you would get the women out, too," she said. "In case you don't know it, this town is a disaster area for babysitters." Everyone laughed, and she felt good and at ease. She offered other possible forum topics, and Walter added a few, and so did Herb Sunderson. Other new project ideas were brought up. She took part in the talk about them, and the men, except Koba, damn him, paid close attention to her. Ike Mazard, Frank, Walter, Claude, even Herb looked right at her, and they nodded and agreed with her, or thoughtfully questioned her, and she felt very good indeed, meeting their questions with wit and good sense. "Move over, Gloria Steinem." Right. Yeah, really, move over, Gloria Steinem. She saw to her surprise and embarrassment that Ike Mazard was sketching her, sitting in his chair next to still watching the ceiling Dale Koba. Still watching the ceiling, hyphenated. He was pecking with a blue pen at a notebook on his dapper, striped knee, looking at her and looking at his pecking? Looking at his pecking. Looking at her and looking at his pecking. Oh, his pecking. His pecking. Like, pecking? I've never seen pecker with an ing. No, pecking. Got it. You got it the first time, right? You guys are smart. Ike Mazard, sketching her. The men had fallen silent. They looked into their drinks, swirled their ice cubes. Hey, she said, shifting uncomfortably and smiling. I'm no Ike Mazard girl. Every girl's an Ike Mazard girl, Mazard said, and smiled at her and smiled at his pecking. Okay. She looked to Walter. He smiled embarrassedly and shrugged. She looked at Mazard again, and not moving her head, at the other men. They looked at her and smiled edgily. Well, this is a conversation killer, she said. Relax, you can move, Mazard said. He turned a page and pecked again. She heard Kim cry, Mommy! Oh, wait, whoa. Relax, you can move, pecked again, Mazard. Frank said, I don't think another baseball field is all that important. She heard Kim cry, Mommy! But Walter touched her arm and, putting his glass down, got up and excused himself past Claude. Oh, good. The men talked about new projects again. She said a word or two, moving her head, but aware all the time of Mazard looking at her and pecking. Try being Gloria Steinem when Ike Mazard is drawing you. It was a bit show-offy of him. She wasn't any once-in-a-lifetime mustn't be missed. All hyphenated. Once-in-a-lifetime mustn't be missed. Not even in the Poochie Loungers. And what were the men so tense about? Their talking seemed forced and gap-ridden. Herb Sanderson was actually blushing. She felt suddenly as if she were naked, as if Mazard were drawing her in obscene poses. She crossed her legs, wanted to cross her arms too, but didn't. Jesus, Joanna, he's a show-offy artist, that's all. You're dressed. Walter came back and leaned down to her. Just a bad dream, he said, and straightening to the men. Anyone want a refill? Diz, Frank? I'll take a small one, Mazard said, looking at her, pecking. Bathroom down that way, Herb asked, getting up. The talking went on, more relaxed and casual now. New projects, old projects. Mazard tucked his pen into his jacket, smiling. She said, whew, and fanned herself. Koba raised his head, keeping his hands behind it, and chin against chest, looked at the notebook on Mazard's knee. Mazard turned pages, looking at Koba, and Koba nodded and said, You never cease to amaze me. Do I get to see? She asked. Of course, Mazard said, and half rose, smiling, holding out the open notebook to her. Walter looked too, and Frank leaned in to see. Portraits of her. There were page after page of them, small and precise, and flattering, as Ike Mazard's work had always been. Full faces, three-quarter views, profiles, smiling, not smiling, talking, frowning. These are beautiful, Walter said, and Frank said, Great, Ike! Claude and Herb came around behind the sofa. She leafed back through the pages. They're wonderful, she said. I wish I could say they were absolutely accurate. But they are, Mazard said. God bless you. She gave the notebook to him, and he put it on his knee and turned its pages, getting out his pen. He wrote on a page and tore it off and offered it to her. It was one of the three-quarter views, a non-smiling one, with the familiar no capitals, Ike Mazard's signature. She showed it to Walter. He said, Thanks, Ike. My pleasure. She smiled at Mazard. Thank you, she said. I forgive you for blighting my adolescence. She smiled at all of them. Does anyone want coffee? They all did except Claude, who wanted tea. She went into the kitchen and put the drawing on the placemats on top of the refrigerator. An Ike Mazard drawing of her. Who'd have thunk it? Back home when she was 11 or 12 reading Mom's journals and companions. Oh, he's like a famous artist. I missed that part. I'm the one reading it, too. It was foolish for her to have gotten so uptight about it. Mazard had been nice to do it. Smiling, she ran water into the coffee maker, plugged it in, and put in the basket and spoon and coffee. She put the top on, pressed the plastic lid down onto the coffee can, and turned around. Koba leaned in the doorway, watching her, his arms folded, his shoulder to the jam. Shoulder to the jam. I like that phrase. Very cool in his jade turtleneck. matching his eyes, of course, and slate gray corduroy suit. He smiled at her and said, I like to watch women doing little domestic chores. You came to the right town, she said. She tossed the spoon into the sink and took the coffee can to the refrigerator and put it in. Koba stayed there watching her. She wished Walter would come. You don't seem particularly dizzy, she said, getting out a saucepan for Claude's tea. Why do they call you Diz? I used to work at Disneyland, he said. She laughed, going to the sink. No, really, she said. That's really. She turned around and looked at him. Don't you believe me, he asked. No, she said. Why not? She thought and knew. Why not, he said. Tell me. To hell with him, she would. You don't look like someone who enjoys making people happy. Torpedoing forever, no doubt, the admission of women to the hallowed and sacrosanct men's association. Koba looked at her disparagingly. How little you know, he said, and smiled and got off the jam and turned and walked away. Creep. I'm not so keen on El Presidente, she said, undressing. And Walter said, Neither am I. He's cold as ice, but he won't be in office forever. He'd better not be, she said, or women'll never get in. When are elections? Right after the first of the year. What does he do? He's the Burnham Massey on Route 9. So's Claude. Oh, listen, what's his last name? Claude's. Axum. Kim began crying. It was burning hot, and they were up until 3 taking her temperature, 103 at first, reading Dr. Spock, calling Dr. Very, and giving her cool baths and alcohol rubs. Sounds like the 70s. Bobbie found a live one. At least she is compared to the rest of these clunks. Her voice rasped from the phone. Her name is Charmaine Wimpress, and if you squint a little, she turns into Raquel Welch. They're up on Burgess Ridge in a $200,000 contemporary. And she's got a maid and a gardener and, now hear this, a tennis court. Really? I thought that would get you out of the cellar. You're invited to play and for lunch, too. I'll pick you up around 11:30. Today? I can't. Kim's still at home. Still? Could we make it Wednesday or Thursday just to be safe? Wednesday, Bobbie said. I'll check with her and call you back. Wham! Pow! Slam! Charmaine was good. Too goddamn good. The ball came zinging straight and hard, first to one side of the court and then to the other. It kept her racing from side to side and then drove her all the way back, just inside the liner that she barely caught. She ran in after it, but Charmaine smashed it down into the left net corner, ungettable, and took the game and the set 6-3. After taking the first set 6-2. Oh, God, I've had it, Joanna said. What a fiasco. Oh, boy. One more, Charmaine called, backing to the serve line. Come on, one more. I can't. I'm not going to be able to walk tomorrow as it is. She picked up the ball. Come on, Bobbie, you play. Bobbie, sitting cross-legged on the grass outside the mesh fence, her face trayed on a sun reflector. Remember those? Remember those being a thing? And there's something about Mary, for sure. Youngins. Anyways, Bobbie, sitting cross-legged on the grass outside the mesh fence, heard her face tray on a sun reflector, said, I haven't played since camp, for Christ's sake. Just a game, then, Charmaine called. One more game, Joanna. All right, one more game. Charmaine won it. You killed me, but it was great, Joanna said, as they walked off the court together. Thank you. Charmaine, patting her high-boned cheeks carefully with an end of her towel, said, You just have to get out more. You just have to get back and practice, that's all. You have a first-rate serve. A fat lot of good it did me. Will you play often? All I've got now are a couple of teenage boys, both with permanent erections. Bobbie said, Send them to my place, getting up from the ground. They walked up the flagstone path toward the house. It's a terrific court, Joanna said, toweling her arm. Then use it, Charmaine said. I used to play every day with Jenny Fisher. Do you know her? But she flaked out on me. Don't you? Will you? How about tomorrow? Oh, I couldn't. They sat on a terrace under a Cinzano umbrella, and the maid, a slight gray-haired woman named Nettie, brought them a pitcher of Bloody Marys and a bowl of cucumber dip and crackers. She's marvelous, Charmaine said. A German Virgo. If I told her to lick my shoes, she'd do it. What are you, Joanna? These women are after my own heart. An American Taurus. My sister. If you tell her to lick your shoes, she spits in your eye, Bobbie said. You don't really believe that stuff, do you? I certainly do, Charmaine said, pouring Bloody Marys. You would too if you came to it with an open mind. Joanna squinted at her. No, not Raquel Welch, but darn close. That's why Jenny Fisher flaked out on me, she said. She's a Gemini. They change all the time. Taurians are stable and dependable. Here's to tennis galore. Joanna said, this particular Taurian has a house and 2 kids and no German Virgo. Charmaine had 1 child, a 9-year-old son named Merrill. Her husband Ed was a television producer. They had moved to Stepford in July. Yes, Ed was in the Men's Association, and no, Charmaine wasn't bothered by the sexist injustice. Anything that gets him out of the house nights is fine with me, she said. He's Aries and I'm Scorpio. Oh, well, Bobbie said, and put a dip-loaded cracker into her mouth. It's a very bad combination, Charmaine said. If I knew then what I know now. Bad in what way? Joanna asked. Which was a mistake. Charmaine told them at length about her and Ed's manifold incompatibilities, social, emotional, and above all sexual. Nettie served them lobster Newburg and julienne potatoes. Oui, my hips. Or oi, sorry. So it's like julienne. I was thinking French. Oi! My hips, Bobbie said, spooning lobster onto her plate, and Charmaine went on in candid detail. Ed was a sex fiend and a real weirdo. He had this rubber suit made for me at God knows what cost in England. I ask you, rubber? Put it on one of your secretaries, I said. You're not going to get me into it. Zippers and padlocks all over. You can't lock up a Scorpio. Virgos anytime. Their thing is to serve. But a Scorpio's thing is to go his own way. If Ed knew then what you know now, Joanna said. It wouldn't have made the least bit of difference, Charmaine said. He's crazy about me. Typical Aries. Nettie brought raspberry tarts and coffee. Bobbie groaned. Charmaine told them about other weirdos she had known. She had been a model and had known several. She walked them to Bobbie's car. Now look, she said to Joanna, I know you're busy, but anytime you have a free hour, anytime, just come on over. You don't even have to call. I'm almost always here. Thanks, I will, Joanna said, and thanks for today. It was great. Anytime, Charmaine said. She leaned to the window. And look, both of you, she said, would you do me a favor? Would you read Linda Goodman's Sun Signs? Just read it. Just read it and see how right she is. They've got it in the Center Pharmacy in paper. Will you please? They gave in, smiling, and promised they would. Ciao, she called, waving to them as they drove away. Well, Bobbie said, rounding the curve of the driveway, she may not be ideal now material, but at least she's not in love with her vacuum cleaner. My God, she's beautiful, Joanna said. Isn't she? Even for these parts, where you've got to admit they look good even if they don't think good. Boy, what a marriage. How about the business with the suit? And I thought Dave had spooky ideas. Dave? Joanna said, looking at her. Bobbie's side flashed a smile. You're not going to get any true confessions out of me, she said. I'm a Leo, and our thing is changing the subject. You and Walter want to go to a movie Saturday night. I think maybe one more. One more? Dun, dun, dun. They had bought the house from a couple named Pilgrim, who had lived in it for only 2 months and had moved to Canada. The Pilgrims had bought it from a Mrs. McGrath, who had bought it from the builder 11 years before. So most of the junk in the storage room had been left by Mrs. McGrath. Actually, it wasn't fair to call it junk. There were two good colonial side chairs that Walter was going to strip and refinish someday. There was a complete 20-volume book of knowledge, now on the shelves in Pete's room, and there were boxes and small bundles of hardware and oddments that, though not finds, at least seemed likely to be of eventual use. Mrs. McGrath had been a thoughtful saver. Joanna had transformed most of the not really junk to a far corner of the cellar before the plumber had installed the sink, and now she was moving the last of it, cans of paint and bundles of asbestos roof shingles, those handy things, while Walter hammered at a plywood counter and Pete handed him nails. Kim had gone with the Van Sant girls and Carol to the library. The Van Sant girls and Carol to the library. Kim, yeah, that's where they were. Joanna unrolled a packet of yellow newspaper and found inside it an inch-wide paintbrush, its clean bristles slightly stiff but still pliable. She began rolling it back into the paper, a half page of the Chronicle and the words, Women's Club caught her eye. Here's author. She turned the paper to the side and looked at it. For God's sake, she said. Pete looked at her, and Walter, hammering. What is it? She got the brush out of the paper and put it down, and held the half page open with both hands, reading. Walter stopped hammering and turned and looked at her. What is it? He asked. She read for another moment and looked at him, and looked at the paper and at him. There was a women's club here, she said. Betty Friedan. No way. Betty Friedan spoke to them, and Kit Sanderson was the president. Dale Koba's wife and Frank Roddenberry's wife were officers. Are you kidding? He said. She looked at the paper and read. Betty Friedan, the author of the Feminine Mystique, addressed members of the Stepford Women's Club Tuesday evening in the Fairview Lane home of Mrs. Herbert Sanderson, the club's president. Over 50 women applauded Mrs. Friedan as she cited the inequalities and frustrations besetting the modern-day housewife. She looked at him. God, they didn't even know what they were just... public and private, hunters and gatherers. Yeah, anyways. I haven't come to any conclusions. For the riptide of feminism. Well, it is. Can I do some? Pete asked. Walter handed the hammer to him. When was that? He asked her. She looked at the paper. It doesn't say. It's the bottom half, she said. There's a picture of the officers. Mrs. Stephen Margulies, Mrs. Dale Koba, author Betty Friedan, Mrs. Herbert Sanderson, Mrs. Frank Roddenberry, and Mrs. Dwayne T. Anderson. She opened the half page toward him, and he came to her and took a sight of it. If this doesn't beat everything, he said, looking at the picture in the article. I spoke to Kit Sanderson, she said. She didn't say a word about it. She didn't have time for a get-together like all the others. This must have been 6 or 7 years ago, he said, fingering the edge of the yellow paper. Or more, she said. The Mystique came out while I was still working. Andreas gave me his review copy, remember? He nodded and turned to Pete, who was hammering vigorously at the countertop. Hey, take it easy, he said. You'll make half moons. I drew red half moons with this permanent marker on my mom's parents' wedding picture. I was like 2 or 3 or something. But I didn't do it to be a jerk. I don't really remember, but they had to have it professionally cleaned, and there's still little spotty red bits. But it's mostly clean. No red moons. Blue clovers, purple horseshoes. Yeah. So, Walter nodded to that she was still working. Andreas gave her the copy to read. He nodded and turned to Pete, who was hammering vigorously at the countertop. Hey, take it easy, he said. You'll make half moons. There we go. He turned back to the paper. Isn't this something, he said. It must have just petered out. With 50 members, she said? Over 50? Applauding Friedan, not hissing her? Well, it's not here now, is it? He said, letting the paper go. Unless they've got the world's worst publicity, Chairman. I'll ask Herb what happened next time I see him. He went back to Pete. Say, that's good work, he said. She looked at the paper and shook her head. I can't believe it, she said. Who are the women? They can't all have moved away. Come on now, Walter said. You haven't spoken to every woman in town. Bobbie has, darn near, she said. She folded the paper and folded it, and put it on the carton of her equipment. The paintbrush was there. She picked it up. Need a paintbrush, she said. Walter turned and looked at her. You don't expect me to paint these things, do you? He asked. No, she said. It was wrapped in the paper. Oh, he said, and turned to the counter. She put the paintbrush down and crouched and gathered a few loose shingles. How could she not have mentioned it, she said. She was the president. One more. As soon as Bobbie and Dave got into the car, she told them. Are you sure it's not one of those newspapers they print in penny arcades, Bobbie said. Fred Smith, Lays, Elizabeth Taylor. It's the Chronicle Ill, Joanna said. The bottom half of the front page. Here, if you can see. She handed it back to them, and they unfolded it between them. Walter turned on the top light. Dave said, You could have made a lot of money by betting me and then showing me. Didn't think, she said. Over 50 women, Bobbie said. Who the hell were they? What happened? That's what I want to know, she said, and why Kit Sanderson didn't mention it to me. I'm going to speak to her tomorrow.
I have to clean the coffee pot now.
They drove into Eastbridge and stood on line for the 9 o'clock showing of an R-rated English movie. The couples in the line were cheerful and talkative, laughing in clusters of 4 and 6, looking to the end of the line, waving at other couples. None of them looked familiar except an elderly couple Bobbie recognized from the Historical Society, and the 17-year-old McCormick boy and a date, holding hands solemnly, trying to look 18. The movie, they agreed, was bloody good, and after it, they drove, because it was English R rated, bloody good. And after it, they drove back to Bobbie and Dave's house, which was chaotic, the boys still up and the sheepdog galumping all over. When Bobbie and Dave had got rid of the sitter and the boys and the sheepdog, they had coffee and cheesecake in the tornado-struck living room. I knew I wasn't uniquely irresistible, Joanna said, looking at an Ike Mazur drawing of Bobbie tucked in the frame of the over-the-mantel picture. Every girl's an Ike Mazur girl, didn't you know? Bobbie said, tucking the drawing more securely into the frame's corner, making the picture more crooked than it already was. Boy, I wish I looked half this good. You're fine the way you are, Dave said, standing behind them. Isn't he a doll? Bobbie said to Joanna. She turned and kissed Dave's cheek. It's still your Sunday to get up early, she said. One more. We're on page 67. We're gonna make it a 70, yo. Alright, 72 is where we're gonna end for the part 2 reading. Might be able to do this in 4 parts. Joanna Eberhardt, Kit Sanderson said and smiled. How are you? Would you like to come in? Yes, I would, Joanna said, if you have a few minutes. Of course I do. Come on in, Kit said. She was a pretty woman, black-haired and dimple-cheeked, and only slightly older-looking than in the Chronicle's unflattering photo. About 33, Joanna guessed, going into the entrance hall. Its ivory vinyl floor looked as if one of those plastic shields in the commercials had just floated down onto it. Sounds of the baseball game came from the living room. Herb is inside with Gary Claybrook, Kit said, closing the front door. Do you want to say hello to them? Joanna went to the living room archway and looked in. Herb and Gary were sitting on a sofa watching a large color TV across the room. Gary was holding half a sandwich and chewing. A plate of sandwiches and 2 cans of beer stood on a cobbler's bench before them. The room was beige and brown and green. Colonial, immaculate. Joanna waited till a retreating ball player caught the ball and said, Hi. Herb and Gary turned and smiled. Hello, Joanna, they said, and Gary said, How are you? Herb said, Is Walter here too? Fine. No, he isn't, she said. I just came over to talk with Kit. Good game? Herb looked away from her, and Gary said, Very. Kit beside her and smelling of Walter's mother's perfume, whatever it was, said, Come, let's go into the kitchen. Enjoy, she said to Herb and Gary. Gary, biting into a sandwich, I smiled through his glasses, and Herb looked at her and said, Thanks, we will. She followed Kit over the plastic shield vinyl. Would you like a cup of coffee? Kit asked. No, thanks. She followed Kit into the coffee-smelling kitchen. It was immaculate, of course, except for the open dryer and the clothes and the laundry basket on the counter on top of it. The washer's round port was storming. The floor was more plastic shield. It's right on the stove, Kit said, so it wouldn't be any trouble. I remember this scene from the movie. Well, in that case, she sat at a round green table while Kit got a cup and saucer from a neatly filled cabinet. The cups all hook-hung, the plates filed in racks. It's nice and quiet now, Kit said, closing the cabinet and going toward the stove. Her figure in a short sky-blue dress was almost as terrific as Charmaine's. The kids are over at Gary and Donna's, she said. I'm doing Marge McCormick's wash. She's got a bug of some kind and can barely move today. Oh, she's getting changed into whatever they are. Oh, that's a shame, Joanna said. Kit fingertipped the top of a percolator and poured coffee from it. Kit fingertipped the top of a percolator and poured coffee from it. I'm sure she'll be good as new in a day or two, she said. How do you take this, Joanna? Milk, no sugar, please. Kit carried the cup and saucer toward the refrigerator. If it's about that get-together again, she said, I'm afraid I'm still awfully busy. It isn't that, Joanna said. She watched Kit open the refrigerator. I wanted to find out what happened to the women's club, she said. Kit stood in the lighted refrigerator, her back to Joanna. The women's club, she said. Oh my, that was years ago. It disbanded. Why? Joanna asked. Kit closed the refrigerator and opened a drawer beside it. Some of the women moved away, she said. She closed the drawer and turned, putting a spoon on the saucer. And the rest of us just lost interest in it. At least I did. She came toward the table, watching the cup. It wasn't accomplishing anything useful, she said. The meetings got boring after a while. She put the cup and saucer on the table and pushed them closer to Joanna. Is that enough milk? She asked. Yes, that's fine, Joanna said. Thanks. How come you didn't tell me about it when I was here the other time? Kit smiled, her dimples deepening. You didn't ask me, she said. If you had, I would have told you. It's no secret. Would you like a piece of cake or some cookies? No thanks, Joanna said. I'm going to fold these things, Kit said, going from the table. Joanna watched her close the dryer and take something white from the pile of clothes on it. She shook it out. A t-shirt. Joanna said, What's wrong with Bill McCormick? Can't he run a washer? I thought he was one of our aerospace brains. He's taking care of Marge, Kit said, folding the t-shirt. These things came out nice and white, didn't they? She put the folded t-shirt into the laundry basket, smiling. Oh, domesticity. It is the cult of domesticity. Like an actress in a commercial. That's what she was, Joanna felt suddenly. That's what they all were, all the Stepford wives, actresses in commercials, pleased with detergents and floor wax and cleaners, shampoos and deodorants. Pretty actresses, big in the bosom but small in the talent, playing suburban housewives unconvincingly, too nicey nice to be real. Kit, she said. Kit looked at her. You must have been very young when you were president of the club, Joanna said, which means you're intelligent and have a certain amount of drive. Are you happy now? Tell me the truth. Do you feel like you're living a full life? Kit looked at her and nodded. Yes, I'm happy, she said. I feel I'm living a very full life. Herb's work is important, and he couldn't do it nearly as well if not for me. We're a unit, and between us, we're raising a family and doing optical research and running a clean, comfortable household and doing community work. Through the Men's Association. Yes, Joanna said. Were the women's club meetings more boring than housework? Kit frowned. No, she said, but they weren't as useful as housework. You're not drinking your coffee. Is anything wrong with it? No, Joanna said. I was waiting for it to cool. She picked up the cup. Oh, said Kit, and smiled, and turned to the clothes and folded something. Joanna watched her. Should she ask who the other women had been? Nah, they would be like Kit, and what difference would that make? She drank from the cup. The coffee was strong and rich flavored, the best she'd tasted in a long time. How are your children? Kit asked. Fine, she said. She started to ask the brand of the coffee, but stopped herself and drank more of it. Dun dun dun! All right, part 3 coming tomorrow, I guess. That's what we're doing here. Ciao!